he had already had a number of his daughters to marry. And so as he was giving Anna to our son Josh, he said to Jim Bob, he took him aside, right, before Josh and Anna got married, and he said, now, Jim Bob, I just have to tell you, one thing to let your son get married. It's a whole other ballgame when you let your daughter get married, because he said, you are giving her away. And you, as the father, have to pray and know that this is the one that God has for her.
There's a pattern that keeps repeating inside this family, and once you see it, it's almost impossible to unsee. Every time one Duggar gets into legal trouble, the people around him don't just rally behind him emotionally, they start moving money, moving property, and moving the truth, just enough to keep the machine running. Today, we're following one thread of that pattern, starting with a courtroom in Florida and ending in a place nobody saw coming, a so-called charity quietly going dark the same week one of their own needed bail money. If stories like this are the reason you're here, hit subscribe now, because we are going to be tracking every twist in this case as it breaks. Let's start with where Joseph Duggar actually stands right now. He's facing 2 counts in Florida, with a motions hearing coming up where he's reportedly asking the court for something striking: unsupervised access to his own children, despite the fact that he doesn't currently have custody of them at all. He's also asking for access to a piece of property, which he claims has been abandoned. We'll come back to that claim because it matters more than it sounds. On top of the Florida case, Joseph and his wife Kendra are jointly facing 8 counts in Arkansas tied directly to their children, and neither of them currently has custody. Here's where it gets strange. Compare Joseph's situation to his brother Josh's. When Josh was first taken into custody, he was given a strict set of release conditions: an ankle monitor, a court-approved guardian who had to supervise him at all times, and a requirement that he live in a home with no children present. Joseph, by contrast, facing a hands-on allegation with a far more severe potential sentence, has no ankle monitor and no court-appointed supervisor of any kind. Nobody is required to be watching where he goes or who he's around. That raises an honest question worth asking out loud. Why would the brother facing the more serious allegation have fewer restrictions than the one facing comparatively less? Is it simply because Joseph's bond is cash-based and the court is treating the money itself as the only real leverage? That's not an accusation, it's a structural question about how these 2 cases were handled so differently. If you've noticed inconsistencies like this in how the justice system treats this family, drop a comment. I want to hear what stood out to you. Now, about that abandoned property Joseph referenced in his Florida filing, here's the part that deserves real scrutiny. According to people close to the situation, Kendra's parents were reportedly pushed out of their own home, with utilities being shut off and a deadline given for them to leave. Around the same time, a power of attorney over certain matters was reportedly transferred to John Duggar. So when Joseph later told a Florida court that the property had been abandoned and that's why he needed access to it, the obvious question is, abandoned by whom and under what circumstances? If a family is pressured out of a home and then that same home gets described in court as abandoned, that's a sequence of events worth laying out plainly, without assuming anyone's motive, but without ignoring the timeline either. And the fallout reportedly didn't stop at a single house. Kendra's parents, Paul and Christina Caldwell, had spent years building a church and a community in Arkansas. Public records show that property tied to their former church is now listed for sale, and Paul has reportedly stepped down from his role as pastor entirely. Whatever you think about the religious side of this story, the practical reality is that an entire life, a home, a congregation, a community, appears to have unraveled in the span of a few months, right around the same time this family conflict became public. If you want a deeper look at how families get pulled into high-control religious systems like this one in the first place, let me know in the comments, because that's a story in itself. Now, here is where this gets genuinely complicated and where the money starts entering the picture. John Duggar is connected to a nonprofit called MediCorp, an organization that presents itself as providing emergency relief during disasters. Publicly available state filings show that as of this case unfolding, Medicorp was not current with Arkansas's charity reporting requirements, meaning, according to state rules, the organization was not legally permitted to solicit donations at all. And yet, right around the time Joseph needed funds tied to his case, Medicorp reportedly sent out a fundraising email to its newsletter list. That timing alone doesn't prove anything specific, but here's what happened next, and this is the part that's hard to explain away as a coincidence. Once attention was drawn to the organization, its website reportedly underwent a quiet transformation. John Duggar's name and photo were removed from the team page. Other names associated with it were removed as well. Language describing the organization as a non-profit disappeared from the site entirely. The only way to find the original team page afterwards was through a cached search result, since the live link had been taken down. One name in particular is worth focusing on. Medicorp had listed a Jimmy Burns as their CFO, described publicly as a licensed CPA with a background at major corporations. Public state board records show that Burns surrendered his CPA license back in 2016 in lieu of further disciplinary proceedings following findings related to representing himself as an active CPA when he reportedly wasn't. If that title was still being used on Medicorp's materials years after the license was surrendered, that's a detail donors deserve to know, regardless of how it happened. And there's one more thread tied to all of this. A subsidiary linked to Medicorp, sometimes referred to as Medic Choppers, reportedly has an outstanding state tax lien on record, alongside reports of an unusually large and unexplained influx of cash around the same period. None of this, on its own, proves wrongdoing, but laid out together, a nonprofit that wasn't even legally allowed to fundraising anyway, a quiet erasure of its own leadership the moment scrutiny arrived, a finance lead whose credentials didn't match what was publicly claimed, and a tax lien sitting in the background. It's a lot of smoke for there to be nothing under it. Tell me honestly in the comments, if you saw this many red flags on a charity before you donated, would you still give your money? So here's where all of this actually leaves us. A man asking a court for unsupervised access to children he doesn't currently have custody of, a property described as abandoned after the family living there was reportedly pushed out, a church and a community dissolved within months, and a nonprofit that wasn't even legally allowed to ask for donations, doing exactly that, right as one of its own needed money the most. None of this is a courtroom verdict. It's a pattern laid end to end, and patterns like this are usually the reason investigators start asking harder questions in the first place. If this kind of deep dive into how families like this actually operate behind closed doors is what you come here for, do me a favor and like this video. It helps these breakdowns reach more people following the case. And make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because there's clearly more here than what's been made public, and I'll be the one breaking it down the moment it surfaces. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.